All right, what's up, PT on Ice family? Hope everybody's doing well. So Justin, Morgan, and the crew just got back from Haiti with the Stand team. I'm representing their shirt this morning. So I'm going to jump in for one more Tuesday for those guys, and then you'll probably hear from them again next week. So anyhow, coming at you live from Colorado. I was actually able to stay here this weekend because Mitch Babcock brought the crew out this way. So I actually got to sit in on the clinical management of the Fitness Athlete Live course and just totally blew me away. Incredible job that Mitch and Zach and Ryan are doing, putting a weekend course together for a bunch of physios who had a very wide spectrum of experience, moving barbells around and being in that space. And man, no doubt about it, by the end of the weekend, you felt very comfortable across all of the major foundational lifts of functional fitness. And it was so cool to watch everyone learn and watch some people get some PRs. Yeah, Mitch rocked indeed, Jim. Watch everyone, just move weight and laugh. And what an incredibly different, Con Ed experience, and very, very needed. So huge thanks for Mitch for coming out. And we're going to chat more about, some of the course because it ties into what we're talking about today. And that is that the greatest skill in healthcare is becoming this ability to look around the corner, right? So historically, healthcare in general, certainly rehabilitation specialists have been in this paradigm of learning techniques and trying to employ their skills to help people who are hurt feel better, right? And that really has been our calling card all along. The issue for that is it's not sustainable, right? So it's very time intensive to see people who are already injured on a one-on-one basis and try to get them back to their previous level of function. Like that is a very all hands on deck kind of solution. And the problem is that type of solution does not have the capacity to meet the demands of how big the pain problem, and overall, I would say health problem is in this country. So, and we know that. We know it's not getting the job done because, the launch of Berkshire Hathaway and Amazon and JP Morgan's, sort of entrance into the healthcare sphere, was a major signal that the biggest players in the world are realizing this system is completely not working. Like we have to revamp the way this is being done. So I think that's yet one more exclamation mark on the statement that the current or previous model simply was not able to meet the demands of what healthcare requires. And so you're going to see some major changes, right? And what we would argue is that the big shift is going to be from the ability to say that I can help your people who are injured and shift that over into saying, I can prevent your people from becoming injured, right? That's going to be the big shift that we're currently undergoing right now because the former can be done at scale, and scale is what we need. And the exciting news is this is now an evidence-based statement, right? Being able to go out there and say, look, I can look at key metrics and I can look at key programming and I can help design systems in a way that reduce the amount of individuals who become actively injured and thus require sort of that all hands on deck one-to-one person help. So with Mitch being out here, we had a lot of dialogue all weekend about the ability to do this with athletes, right? So many of you or most of you are going to be familiar with Tim Gabbett's work, right? Looking at acute and chronic workload ratio. Right? In other words, this body of evidence that shows when someone is not maintaining a fairly high chronic workload ratio, in other words, they're not consistently doing a lot of activity, and then they go and try to do a whole lot of activity, those people tend to get hurt. Right? So when someone has a low chronic workload ratio and puts on top of that the acute workload ratio that's very high, that asymmetry winds up getting people into trouble, right? Now we've known that from the weekend warrior paradigm that's been going on forever, right? And it's a classic example of someone who winds up getting hurt is someone who's not doing a whole lot to maintain their fitness, tries to do a whole lot in a short period of time, and winds up with an injury. So Gabbett and his group have really, really nice evidence showing that when that acute to chronic workload ratio is violated, right, like greater than 1.2 or 1.3, you wind up seeing this increased prevalence of injury. right? But it's gotten even way more exciting than that. So if you look at the CrossFit realm, and maybe I'm stepping into the Fitness Friday genre here, but when you look at the CrossFit realm specifically, there was an article by Williams last year in 2017 that looked at heart rate variability alongside acute and chronic workload ratio in competitive CrossFit athletes. And what they found was, so I guess I should back up a little bit. So heart rate variability is a really cool emerging part of science that's giving us even more insight into individuals who are getting overworked, getting overtrained, and possibly more susceptible to injury. So, by the way, one great resource, we had Dr. Amy Lichon, that's Lichon. She's actually a physician here, an anesthesiologist right here in Fort Collins. We had her on the EIM Clinical Podcast, and she is an expert in heart rate variability. So I will actually grab that episode and I will put it in the notes underneath this video for those of you who want to watch it. But the real basic idea here is that when you're getting overtrained or when your sympathetic nervous system is really driving the bus, we see a reduction in heart rate variability. In other words, from beat to beat, and from beat to beat, there's less variability in that time frame. That is not a good thing. So somebody who has low heart rate variability is generally somebody who is overstressed and overtrained, right? You want high heart rate variability, right? That shows a flexible, adaptable system. That shows somebody who can adjust to the demands of training or life that are coming at them, right? So whether you're dealing with chronic pain, whether you're dealing with athletes, you want to see them maintain really good high heart rate variability. That would indicate they are responding well to the overall load of either life and training that's being thrown at them. All right, so Williams et al. Last year looked at, it's a small sample size, it's not a huge article, it's 6 competitive CrossFit athletes, but they looked at, does heart rate variability, is that a moderator of how well somebody can take on different acute to chronic workload ratios? And the answer was yes. So what they found was, when athletes were able to maintain high heart rate variability or high adaptability, right? High heart rate variability, they could tolerate a more aggressive acute to chronic workload ratio in their CrossFit programming, right? So they actually figured out workload ratio by looking at minutes trained multiplied by RPE, right? And they looked at whether or not heart rate variability correlated and moderated the injury effect of a high acute to chronic workload ratio. And the answer was yes. The athletes who were able to maintain a good heart rate variability, which is a high heart rate variability, were able to tolerate a more drastic acute to chronic workload ratio, right? So they were more robust. They were more resilient to being able to tolerate that. Right? So we're seeing that moderators like heart rate variability, which nowadays can be tracked by an app, right, is one more thing that we can look at to see who might wind up getting injured. Again, it's our ability to look around the corner, right? So if we're tracking acute to chronic workload ratio in our athletes and the individuals we're working with, and we're tracking heart rate variability, we're going to be able to look at these 2 evidence-based variables and say, look, your acute to chronic workload ratio is getting really high, right? That would suggest that injury might be around the corner. Also, your heart rate variability is plummeting, possibly suggesting you're getting overtrained. And these 2 things together, right, might give us that flag that says, you know what, we're going to make some changes. We're going to de-throttle a bit, get off the gas, make sure you're doing some good active recovery strategies and get your body and mind in a place that is less likely to experience injury. Okay. But it gets even better. There's even more things that we can do to look around the corner. So Gavitt's group just published an article. It's actually still in press, but I was able to read it last week, that showed that there are other moderators. So they looked at, I'll make this short. I realize I'm getting a bit wordy here, but they looked at the relationship between strength and speed and repeated sprintability, and whether or not those moderated the injurious effects of acute and chronic workload ratio. And what they were able to show was people who were stronger, and they looked at 3 rep max of trap bar deadlift. So a very serious assessment of lower extremity and global strength. People who were physically stronger tolerated changes in acute to chronic workload ratio better. To me, this is extremely important because now what I want you guys to do is realize we've got all these great things to look around the corner, right? We can look at somebody's programming and see if the acute to chronic workload ratio is getting into a space that could be injurious. We can look at someone's heart rate variability and see whether or not there's changes that are maladaptive, indicating they're getting overtrained and possibly getting more susceptible to injury. Okay? We can look at their strength and their speed and know that if we build those things up, they are going to tolerate more acute to chronic workload ratio changes than if they're not strong and not fast. So we're getting all these cool abilities to look around the corner and be able to predict who might wind up having a problem. But now what I want to ask you to do, because this is where I believe it really intersects with the mainstream of healthcare, is take this out of the athletic environment. By all means, if you're in the athletic environment, use all of this. But for the rest of us, right? Take this out of the athletic environment and ask yourself, who has the greatest disruptions in the least amount of planning and preparation in the acute and chronic workload ratio world? To me, that answer is the general workforce all day. Right? You think about the companies we work with here in Northern Colorado. How many folks are really calculating acute to chronic workload ratio? Right? When someone changes jobs, right? Or someone gets moved up and that spot has to be filled. Are we really considering whether the individual filling that spot has had enough chronic workload build up to really handle the acute demands of what they're being asked to do in this new position, which is not what they've been historically doing? The answer is a widespread no. Right? Nobody's looking at that. Yet we know that musculoskeletal complaints are the number one issue, the number one cost issue that employers are facing with their employees' healthcare issues. Right? And yet here we are not looking at evidence-based acute to chronic workload ratio that we know causes musculoskeletal injury, and yet no one's tracking that and making sure that's on par before someone changes jobs or before changes are made to somebody's job. Imagine if we were. Imagine if every big company had somebody in there who was tracking acute to chronic workload demands. And when jobs got changed or people moved positions, they made sure to prepare that individual or to modify the job to make sure the acute to chronic workload ratio wasn't violated. All right, go one step further. Imagine if not only we did that, but we use very cheap, inexpensive apps to track heart rate variability, to be able to see which employees were beginning to get overtrained, overworked, and might need to have their overall demands from a physical perspective reduced or evaluated. Okay, go one step further. Imagine if we took these same people whose heart rate we were tracking, whose acute to chronic workload ratio we were observing, and made them stronger and faster. We know from the recent article published by Tim Gabbett that making folks stronger and faster helps them to adapt to more challenging acute to chronic workload ratios, right? We know that people who have very, very low heart rate variability are more susceptible to injury when acute to chronic workload ratios get violated. What if we got in these spaces and said there is hard science that if we can keep your employees at a safe acute to chronic workload ratio, if we can keep some key metrics like heart rate variability, and if we can have some access to them to build them strength and speed programs that make them more robust human beings, we can dramatically reduce the overall injuries you have and thus your overall healthcare spend. That's where it's going. That's looking around the corner, right? And that is exciting to me anyhow. Right? To be able to help massive amounts of people avoid injury, the costs and sequela of which are creating tremendous financial strain, not only on those individuals, but the companies in which they serve. Right? But what if we use the science to solve that problem? This is the most exciting time in healthcare that has ever existed, in my opinion, because all of this is coming to fruition. Right? If you get a chance, I want you to read this blog by Ash James out of the UK. So Ash and I have been talking quite a bit lately. He's jumping in the APHPT group. I am going to put his blog underneath this video. If you get 10 minutes, read that bad boy. It talks about how incredibly exciting it is to work with these industrial athletes. And that's what I firmly believe we've got to start calling them, right? These are industrial athletes that have an acute and chronic workload ratio, that have baseline strength considerations, that have autonomic nervous systems that we can monitor, track, improve, and prevent. We can do this. The science is all right there. It's all affordable. It's all doable. All we have to be willing to do is look around the corner. You know, guys, I'll wrap up right now, but in any given time, you're always tugging between these two different paradigms of trying to make the existing system better, right? Or trying to do something radically different. The people who are going to win in this next 10 years, this next decade, and there's going to be some major changes coming down the pipe, are those who yet again embrace and not or. Why don't we get more and more efficient at helping folks who are already experiencing injury and illness while preventing a massive amount of them from ever having to do so? Why don't we do both? And why don't we do it in every community across this country? Guys, thanks for having me. Kind of atypical to have me on a Tuesday. Justin and Morgan, congratulations on yet another unbelievable trip to Haiti. 1,600 people treated. What you guys are doing continues to be something I look up to every single day. So thank you for being who you are and doing what you do. That's all I got. Enjoy the rest of your day. If you're serving patients, do so well, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.